There is an empire that once stretched across more of the Earth's surface than any before it, or any that would come after. And it was built not by people who lived behind walls, but by people who lived under open sky. You have heard its name. You may have seen its borders drawn on maps in time-lapse videos, swelling outward like a breath across an entire continent. But you have almost certainly never been asked to stand inside it, to feel the wind that blew through it, to reckon honestly with what it would ask of your body and your mind and every quiet assumption you carry about how a human life is supposed to work. That is what we are going to do here, slowly and without hurry, over the next while. We are going to set you down in the heart of the 13th century Mongol Empire, and we are going to see how you fare. Before we go any further, though, there is something small I would like you to do. If you are able, leave a comment and tell me where you are right now and what time it is where you are. It does not need to be precise, just the city or the country, or even just a description. A kitchen table, a parked car, a dark bedroom with the phone propped on a pillow, and the hour, roughly. Morning, evening, the strange hollow of 2 in the morning. I ask because there is something oddly comforting about it. The thought of all these different people in all these different places, separated by thousands of miles and every possible variety of weather and light, all drifting through the same ancient grassland together. Someone in Sao Paulo at midnight, and someone in Oslo at breakfast, and someone sitting on a bus in Osaka in the middle of the afternoon, all standing on the same step, all looking up at the same enormous sky. So do that, if you like, and then let us begin. You are standing on grass. That is the first thing. Not a lawn, not a meadow, not a field in any sense you have ever used the word. This is grass that goes to the horizon in every direction. Grass that covers the earth so completely and stretches so far that it stops being a surface and becomes a condition. The steppe. The great Eurasian steppe. The largest continuous grassland on the planet, running roughly from the plains of Hungary in the west to the mountains of Manchuria in the east. And you are near the center of it, in the land that will one day be called Mongolia. Though no one calls it that yet, it is simply the land. The only land that matters. The land the people who live here know better than they know the sound of their own breathing. It is dawn, or very nearly. The sky above you is enormous. That is a word people use carelessly. Enormous. But here, it earns itself. The sky is not something above you so much as something around you, something you are inside of, because there is nothing between you and it. No trees, no buildings, no hills tall enough to interrupt the line where earth meets air. The horizon is a perfect, unbroken circle, and you are standing at its center, and the sky presses down on you from every direction with a weight that is not physical, but is real nonetheless. People who visit the open steppe for the first time often describe a feeling of vertigo, not the vertigo of height, but the vertigo of exposure. The sudden understanding that there is nothing between your small body and the full, indifferent breadth of the atmosphere. You feel it now, a faint dizziness, not unpleasant exactly, but disorienting, a sense of being too visible, too uncovered, too much out in the open. The sky is pale at the eastern edge, a thin, cold band of light that is not yet gold, not yet even yellow, just a dilution of the darkness, a slow leaking of night. Everything else is blue-black and scattered with the last of the stars, and the grassland below is barely distinguishable from the sky above. And for a moment, you are floating between them, suspended, without anchor, without reference, without the 1,000 small architectural cues your brain relies on to tell you where you are and what scale you exist at. Then the light strengthens, just slightly, and you begin to see the grass. It is short here, cropped close and dry, a tawny brownish gold that in certain lights looks almost silver. It moves. Even in what feels like stillness, it moves. Because the wind on the steppe is not an event, but a constant. It does not gust and die. It does not blow and then relent. It simply is. A steady, ceaseless pressure against your face and your chest and the backs of your hands. Cold and dry, carrying the smell of dust and dried vegetation, and something faintly mineral, something like stone, though there is no stone in sight. The wind is the second thing you notice, after the grass, and it is the thing you will never stop noticing, because it will never stop. It will blow while you are awake, and it will blow while you sleep. It will press against whatever shelter you manage to find, and it will find the gaps in that shelter, and it will remind you with every breath that you are not in a place that cares whether you are comfortable. The temperature is the third thing. It is cold. Not the cold of a chilly morning in a temperate city, not the cold that makes you wish you had brought a jacket. This is a cold with substance to it, a cold that feels architectural, as though the air itself has thickened into something you have to push through. Your fingers are already stiff. Your ears ache. The tip of your nose has gone numb, and you have been standing here for only a few minutes. This is autumn, let us say. Early autumn, because if we set you down here in winter, this chapter would be very short and very grim. Even in autumn, the nights on the Mongolian steppe plunge well below freezing, and the mornings are slow to warm, and the wind ensures that whatever warmth the sun does offer is stripped away before it can settle against your skin. If it were January, the temperature where you are standing could reach -40. That number exists in both Celsius and Fahrenheit, incidentally. -40 is the point where the two scales converge, which feels fitting because -40 is also the point where the distinction between cold and pain becomes meaningless. At -40, exposed skin begins to freeze in minutes. The air hurts to breathe. Moisture in your nostrils crystallizes with each inhale. Your eyelashes frost over. The Mongol steppe in deep winter is one of the most brutally cold inhabited places on Earth. Colder than much of Scandinavia, colder than most of Alaska. A place where the wind can drive the effective temperature so far below the actual temperature that the numbers become almost absurd. Academic, relevant only to the dead. But it is not January. It is early autumn, and you are merely cold, not in danger, not yet. You are standing in the grass and the wind is blowing, and the sun is coming up, and you are beginning to understand the first and most fundamental truth about this place, which is that it is not empty. It looks empty. Your eyes, trained by a lifetime of living among structures, among verticals, among walls and corners and ceilings, interpret the absence of those things as absence itself. But the steppe is not empty. It is full. It is full of grass and wind and light and distance. And it is full of information that you cannot read, written in a language you were never taught. The color of the grass tells you what season it is and how recently it rained, and whether the grazing here is good or spent. The behavior of the wind tells you what the weather will do in the coming hours. The angle of the light tells you not just the time of day, but the time of year. And from that, if you knew how to read it, you could deduce how long until the first freeze, how long until the rivers ice over, how long you have to move your animals to lower ground before the high pastures become fatal. The steppe is a manuscript, dense with meaning, and you are illiterate. This is the land that made the Mongol people, and it made them through a process that was not gentle. For thousands of years before the rise of the empire, the peoples of the Central Asian steppe lived in a state of intimate negotiation with this landscape, and the terms of that negotiation were non-negotiable. You move or you die. You read the land or you die. You learn every skill required to extract survival from a place that offers no surplus, no margin, no forgiveness, or you die. The steppe does not punish failure with discomfort. It punishes failure with death. And it has been doing so for so long that the people who remain, the people who are here when you arrive in the 13th century, are the inheritors of an unbroken tradition of competence so deep and so thoroughly integrated into every aspect of daily life that they do not even think of it as skill. It is simply existence. It is simply what it means to be alive. You do not have this. You do not have any of this. You are standing on the steppe with the knowledge and the physical conditioning of a person from the 21st century, which means you know how to operate a phone and sit in a chair and navigate a grocery store and perhaps drive a car and perhaps type at a reasonable speed. None of these things will help you here. Not one. The gap between what you know and what you need to know is not a gap that can be bridged by cleverness or determination or the vague, comforting modern belief that human beings are adaptable and resourceful. You are adaptable and resourceful within the narrow range of environments your life has prepared you for. This is not that environment. This is somewhere else entirely. And the rules here are older than anything you have ever encountered, and absolutely without compromise. Look around you. The sun has cleared the horizon now, a flat, pale disk that gives light without warmth, and the steppe has resolved itself into a vast, rolling expanse of dry grass, golden in the new light, rippling under the wind like the surface of an ocean. The comparison is not original, but it is accurate. People who cross the steppe, both in the 13th century and today, consistently reach for the language of the sea to describe it. The waves of grass, the swells of the terrain, the way the land rises and falls in long, slow undulations that are not quite hills and not quite flat. A topography that seems designed to keep you permanently uncertain of what lies just beyond the next rise. And like the sea, the steppe offers no shelter. There are no trees here, or almost none. In the river valleys, yes, you will find willows and elms and the occasional stand of larch. But on the open grassland, where you are standing, there is nothing taller than the grass itself, which in late summer might reach your waist, but now, in early autumn, barely clears your ankles. This means there is nowhere to hide, nowhere to escape the wind, nowhere to build a fire that will not be seen from miles away, nowhere to find the materials to build anything at all, because there is no wood, no stone readily at hand, no clay in useful quantities. The people who live here build their homes from felt, which they make from the wool of their sheep, stretched over frames of willow lattice, which they carry with them. They burn dried animal dung for fuel, because there is nothing else to burn. They drink the fermented milk of their mares, because the water sources are unreliable and sometimes days apart. Every single element of their material existence is a solution to a problem posed by this landscape, and every single solution was developed over centuries of trial and error and death. And you have access to none of them. You are standing on the steppe with nothing. No shelter, no food, no water, no fire, no knowledge of where the nearest water source is, or the nearest encampment, or which direction to walk to find either one. You do not know how to find north. You do not know how to read the stars as they appear in this hemisphere, at this latitude. You do not know how to identify the plants that are edible, or the ones that are toxic, or the ones that can be used for medicine. You do not know which insects to avoid, which rivers are safe to drink from, how to cross a marshland without sinking, or what to do when the temperature drops tonight and the wind picks up and your body, already cold, begins to lose heat faster than it can produce it. Hypothermia is a quiet death. That is one of the things that makes it so effective. It does not announce itself with pain, not at first. It begins with shivering, which is your body's attempt to generate heat through involuntary muscle contraction. And shivering is uncomfortable, but not alarming. Then the shivering intensifies, and your coordination begins to deteriorate, and your thinking becomes confused, and you start making poor decisions, which is particularly dangerous because you are no longer capable of recognizing that your decisions are poor. You may stop shivering, which feels like an improvement, but is actually a sign that your body has exhausted its ability to warm itself. You may feel a strange, paradoxical warmth, a sensation so convincing that people in the late stages of hypothermia have been known to remove their clothing, which accelerates the process. And then you become drowsy, and you sit down, and you do not get up. On the open steppe in autumn, without shelter, without fire, without the heavy layered clothing of animal skins and felt that every Mongol wears as a matter of course. This process could begin within hours of sunset. The temperature does not need to be extreme. It does not need to be -40. It merely needs to be cold enough and windy enough. And you merely need to be wet enough, or tired enough, or exposed enough. And the arithmetic of heat loss tilts against you, and the steppe collects what it is owed. This is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to establish something clearly at the very beginning, before we go any further. The land itself is the first obstacle, and it is sufficient. Before we talk about the society and the skills and the horses and the laws and the wars, before we talk about anything that the Mongol people built or believed or achieved, we need to sit with this for a moment. The land, the grass and the wind and the cold and the distance, the sheer physical hostility of a place that looks from a distance like nothing more than an endless, peaceful meadow. The Mongol steppe is beautiful. It is genuinely, staggeringly beautiful, in the way that all vast and indifferent landscapes are beautiful, the way the open ocean is beautiful, the way a desert is beautiful, the way the polar ice is beautiful. It is beautiful because it does not need you. It does not accommodate you. It exists on a scale and according to a logic that has nothing to do with human comfort. And standing in it, you feel this. You feel yourself become small, become contingent, become one small, warm organism in an enormous cold system. And there is a kind of clarity in that feeling, a kind of honesty that the built environment, with its insulation and its right angles and its thermostats, rarely offers. But beauty will not keep you alive, and clarity will not keep you warm. And the sun, which is now fully up, pale and distant in a sky that has turned the colour of steel, is already beginning its short autumn arc toward the western horizon. And when it sets, you will be alone in the dark with the wind, and the temperature will fall, and everything you do not know will begin to matter. The Mongol people knew this landscape the way you know your own home. better. They knew it the way a sailor knows the sea, with a knowledge that is partly intellectual and partly physical, and partly something deeper than either, something accumulated in the body over a lifetime of daily practice. They knew which grasses meant water was nearby. They knew which direction the deer moved in autumn, and which passes the wolves favoured in winter. They knew the smell of snow coming, the feel of a change in the wind, the particular quality of light that meant a dust storm was hours away. They knew how to find dry ground for a camp, and how to angle their shelters against the prevailing wind, and how to bank a dung fire so that it would hold its heat through the night. They knew these things because their parents had taught them, and their parents' parents had taught them, and the chain of knowledge went back so far that it was indistinguishable from instinct. You are standing at the beginning of that chain, or rather, you are standing outside of it entirely, looking in, and the distance between where you stand and where they stand is not a distance you can cross. Not in a day, not in a week, perhaps not in a lifetime. The step is patient. It has been here for millennia, and it will be here for millennia more, and it does not care whether you understand it. It will simply go on being itself, grass and wind and sky, and you will either learn to live within its terms, or you will not, and the step will not notice either way. So here you are, alone on the grass, under the wide, pale sky, with the wind pressing against you, and the cold settling into your joints, and the sun already past its zenith, already beginning to fall. This is where we begin. This is the world you have entered, the world of the Mongol Empire. And we have not yet encountered a single other person, not a single horse, not a single tent on the horizon. We have only encountered the land. And the land, all by itself, is already more than you are equipped to survive. Let that settle for a moment. Let the wind blow. Let the grass ripple, and the light change, and the cold deepen. We will move forward soon, into the warmth of a felt tent, and the smell of boiling milk, and the sound of animals stirring at dawn. But for now, stand here. Feel the ground under your feet. Feel the enormous, indifferent weight of the sky. And understand, quietly, without panic, that you are very, very far from home, and that everything you are about to encounter in this place will ask more of you than you have to give. The step does not wait. It is already moving beneath you, the grass bending and releasing, bending and releasing, a rhythm older than language, older than memory, older than the empire that will rise from this very ground and sweep across half the known world. The wind carries the smell of distance, The light is thin and gold and feeding. Somewhere far away, beyond the curve of the earth, a column of smoke rises from a dung fire, and around that fire, a family is going about the business of living in a way that you cannot yet imagine. We will go to them. We will sit beside that fire. But not yet. From now, this is enough. The grass and the wind. The beginning of understanding how little you know. You wake to the sound of animals. Not one or two, but a low, layered murmur of living things. The shifting of heavy bodies. The wet pull of mouths against grass. The occasional bleat or snort carried on the cool air. Before your eyes are fully open, you smell them. There is a warm, sour, grassy scent pressing against the morning, thick and close. A smell that is not unpleasant, so much as unfamiliar in its heaviness. Wool and dung and milk, and the sharp undertone of animal urine. All of it mixed together with the cold, clean edge of the steppe wind. You sit up and you realize that this smell is not drifting from some distant pen or barn. It is everywhere. It is in the fabric beneath you. It is in the air you are breathing. It is the smell of the life you have woken into, and it will not leave you for as long as you are here. Somewhere nearby, a woman is already working. You can hear the low rhythm of her movements, a soft, repetitive sound you cannot quite place. And if you were to pull aside the heavy felt door covering and look out into the grey half-light, you would see her crouched beside a mare, her hands moving in quick, practiced motions, drawing milk into a leather pail. She has been awake for some time. She was awake before the light came. This is not diligence or ambition. This is simply what the morning requires. The mares must be milked before the sun climbs too high, before the foals are released to nurse and take what remains. There is a narrow window for this work, and she has known its edges since she was a girl. Known them the way you know that a traffic light turns green, or that a kettle clicks off when the water boils. It is not knowledge she thinks about. It is knowledge that lives in her hands and in the quiet clock of her body, and she moves through it without hesitation. You, on the other hand, have never milked anything. You have perhaps seen it done in a photograph or a film, and you carry some vague notion that it involves pulling downward on something. But the specifics dissolve the moment you try to imagine yourself doing it. A Mongol mare is not a docile dairy cow standing placidly in a stall. She is half wild, nervous, loyal to her foal and suspicious of strangers, and she will not stand still for you. She will shift and stamp and swing her heavy head around to look at you with an eye that is not welcoming. The woman milking her knows how to approach, how to calm with voice and touch, how to position her body so the mare accepts her presence. She knows how much pressure to use, how quickly to work, how to read the animal's breathing for signs of agitation. You know none of this. And so, the very first task of the very first hour of the day is already beyond you, and the day has barely begun. The milk she collects will not be drunk as it is. Mare's milk is thin and slightly sweet, and the Mongols do not simply pour it into a cup and hand it to you. Instead, it will be poured into a large leather sack that hangs near the entrance of the ger, and over the coming hours and days, it will be stirred and agitated and left to ferment into airag, the mildly alcoholic drink that forms the backbone of the Mongol diet during the warmer months. Every person who passes the sack is expected to give it a stir, a few strokes with a wooden paddle, keeping the fermentation active, keeping the cultures alive and working. It is a communal, almost absent-minded act, like the way you might flip a light switch as you walk through a room. But the drink it produces is something your stomach is not prepared for. Airag is sour and fizzy and faintly astringent, with a thin, almost watery body and a smell that sits somewhere between yogurt and wet earth. Your first sip would startle you. Your second would not be easier. Travelers and ambassadors from other civilizations wrote about this drink with a mixture of fascination and quiet revulsion, many of them noting that it took days or weeks before their bodies adjusted, and some never did. You would drink it because there is nothing else to drink, and you would feel your stomach tighten around it like a fist. But airag is only one form the milk takes. A Mongol household transforms milk the way a settled household transforms grain, into dozens of different products, each serving a different purpose, each requiring a different technique. There is aru, the hard dried curd that is set out in the sun on the roof of the ger and left to harden into dense, chalky pieces that can be stored for months and carried on long journeys. There is urum, the thick, clotted cream skimmed from boiled milk and eaten with a reverence that suggests how precious fat is in a world where calories are never guaranteed. There is yogurt, and there is dried yogurt, and there is a crumbly, intensely sour cheese that is pressed into molds and aged in the open air. The women of the household, and it is overwhelmingly the women who do this work, move through these preparations with a fluency that is almost musical, one task flowing into the next, the timing governed not by clocks, but by the feel of the curd in their fingers, the smell of the fermentation, the colour of the cream as it thickens. You would watch this and understand almost nothing of what you are seeing. You would not know when the milk had been heated enough. You would not know when the curd had set. You would not know which stage required stirring and which required stillness, or how long to leave the ardul drying before it was ready, or how to tell by touch whether the urum had reached the right consistency. Every single step would require someone to stop what they are doing and show you, and every correction would cost the household a small measure of time and patience it cannot easily spare. Now step back and look at the structure you are standing in. The ger. You may have heard it called a yurt, though that is a Turkic word and not the one used here. It's an extraordinary piece of engineering, and you would not know how to build one, or set one up, or take one down. From the outside it looks simple. A round, white felt tent perhaps 5 or 6 meters across, its roof sloping gently upward to a circular opening at the crown that lets out smoke and lets in a column of pale sky. But this simplicity is the simplicity of mastery, not of crudeness. The frame is made of a lattice of willow wood, flexible and strong, which expands and contracts like an accordion. This lattice forms the circular wall. Into the top of this wall, long, slender roof poles are fitted, each one reaching upward and inward to connect to the crown ring, the circular wooden frame at the apex that holds the entire structure in tension. The whole assembly is then covered in layers of felt, thick, dense, hand-pressed felt made from the wool of sheep, beaten and rolled and wetted and beaten again, until it forms a fabric that is at once insulating, water-resistant, and remarkably durable. Over the felt goes a layer of white canvas, or hide, and the entire structure is lashed together with ropes and bands woven from horsehair or wool. A skilled Mongol family can erect a ger in less than an hour. They can take it down in even less time. They do this not once, but many times each year, because they are not staying. This is the fact that would perhaps unsettle you most deeply. You are not settling anywhere. The Mongol household is built to move, and it moves according to the needs of the animals, to fresh pasture, to water, to sheltered valleys in winter, to higher ground in summer. The entire material world of a family, their home, their tools, their stores of food, their bedding, their iron pots, their sacred objects, must be packed and loaded and transported and unpacked and arranged again, over and over, across the turning year. The felt walls are rolled, the lattice is collapsed, the roof poles are bundled. Everything is lashed onto the backs of oxen, or loaded onto heavy wooden carts drawn by teams of animals, and the whole household begins to move across the grass like a slow, deliberate creature migrating with the season. You would not know how to fold the felt so it does not crease and crack. You would not know which pieces load first, or how to balance the weight across the oxen's backs so the animals can walk without strain. You would not know how to secure the ropes so the load does not shift on uneven ground. You would not know how to drive the oxen, or how to calm them when the wind picks up and the cart begins to sway. And when you arrive at the new campsite, you would not know where to place the ger, which direction the door should face, how far from the river, how the surrounding terrain affects the wind and the drainage. Among the Mongols, the door of the ger always faces south. Always. This is not arbitrary. It is cosmological and practical at once, orienting the household toward the sun, away from the prevailing northern wind, and in alignment with a spatial order that governs everything inside. The back of the ger, the north side, farthest from the door, is the place of honor. The west side is the men's side. The east side is the women's side. The hearth sits in the center. Every object has a place, and every place has a meaning. And if you were to set something down in the wrong spot, or sit in the wrong area, or walk across the space in the wrong direction, you would not simply be making a practical error. You would be violating an order that is at once domestic and spiritual, and the people around you would notice. Let us talk about the hearth. In the center of the ger, directly beneath the crown opening, there is a small fire. It burns not wood. There is almost no wood on the open steppe, but argol, which is dried animal dung, primarily from cattle and horses. You would recoil from this at first. The idea of burning excrement, of cooking over it, of warming your hands at a fire fed by it, would strike you as degrading or unsanitary. And you would be wrong on both counts. Dried dung burns slowly and steadily and gives off a surprisingly mild, earthy smoke. It is an efficient fuel in a landscape that offers almost no alternative, and the Mongols gather it and dry it and store it with the same care that a settled household might give to a woodpile or a coal cellar. The children gather it. They walk behind the herds and collect the patties and set them out to dry in the wind and sun. And no one considers this shameful or unpleasant. It is simply one of the many small acts of maintenance that keep the household alive. And like all the others, it is learned early and performed without complaint. The fire must be tended carefully. It must not be allowed to go out, and it must not be allowed to burn too fiercely. You must not poke it with a knife or a sharp instrument, because this is considered an offense against the fire spirit. You must not throw rubbish into it. You must not step over it. You must not pour water on it. These are not suggestions. These are taboos, deeply held and strictly observed. And if you were to violate one of them, casually, out of ignorance, the way you might toss a tissue into a campfire at home, the reaction of the people around you would be swift and serious. Fire is sacred to the Mongols. It is a living presence in the household, deserving of respect and propitiation. And your relationship with it is not that of a modern person idly poking at coals. It is the relationship of a guest in the home of something ancient and watchful, and you are expected to behave accordingly. Now consider the animals. Outside the ger, surrounding it, defining the rhythm and purpose and wealth of this family, are the herds. The Mongols keep 5 animals, and they call them the 5 snouts: horses, cattle, sheep, goats, and camels. Each serves a different purpose. Each requires different handling. The horses provide milk and transportation and status. The cattle provide milk and meat and the muscle to pull the heavy carts. The sheep provide wool for felt and meat for the pot, and fat for cooking. The goats provide cashmere and milk and a wiry, restless energy that makes them harder to manage than the sheep. The camels, where they are kept, provide transportation for the heaviest loads, and the coarse wool that can be spun into rope and fabric. A single family might tend several hundred animals. A wealthy family might tend thousands. And every one of these animals must be watched and watered and moved and protected from predators and treated when sick and guided to fresh grazing and brought back in the evening and counted and known.
You do not know these animals. You do not know their sounds or their habits or their illnesses. You do not know how to tell when a ewe is about to lamb or when a mare is ready to foal. You do not know how to treat a horse with colic or a sheep with foot rot. You do not know how to castrate a young bull or dock a lamb's tail or shear a sheep with a blade rather than electric clippers. You do not know how to slaughter an animal in the Mongol way, which is not by cutting the throat, as many other pastoral cultures do, but by making a small incision in the chest and reaching in to pinch the aorta, stopping the heart quickly and without spilling blood onto the ground, because blood is precious and must be collected and used, and because spilling it carelessly is both wasteful and spiritually offensive. You would not be able to do this. You would not want to do this. And in a world where slaughtering an animal is not a distant industrial process, but an intimate, necessary act performed with your own hands in front of your own children, your squeamishness would not be understood. It would be a mark of something close to incompetence. The diet you would face here is almost entirely animal-based. In the summer months, it is primarily dairy, milk in its many forms, supplemented by whatever wild onions or garlic or roots can be gathered from the steppe. In the winter months, it is primarily meat, mutton mostly, boiled in water with perhaps a handful of wild herbs or a few grains of precious salt. The Mongols do not farm. They do not grow wheat or rice or vegetables. They do not bake bread except in rare circumstances where grain has been obtained through trade or tribute. Your body, accustomed to a diet rich in carbohydrates and sugars and processed foods, would struggle with this. Your digestion would protest. You would crave sweetness, starch, variety. You would find the mutton fatty and strong-flavoured, and the dairy products aggressively sour. You would lose weight quickly, not because there is not enough food, but because your body does not know how to extract what it needs from what is offered. The Mongols' bodies have adapted over generations to this diet. Their gut flora, their enzyme production, their metabolic rhythms are all calibrated to a world of milk and meat and animal fat. Yours are not. And this mismatch, quiet and internal and invisible, would wear you down day by day, sapping your energy and clouding your thinking, and leaving you just slightly less capable of meeting each new demand this life places on you. As the day wears on, you begin to understand something about the pace of this life that surprises you. It is not frantic. It is not rushed. But it is relentless. There is no moment in the day when there is nothing to do. The milking leads to the processing of milk. The processing of milk leads to the tending of the fire. The tending of the fire leads to the mending of felt, or the spinning of wool, or the braiding of rope, or the repair of a saddle, or the stitching of a boot. The women work, the men work, the children work, the elderly, if they are able, work. And none of this work is performed with the assistance of any tool or device that you would recognize as labor-saving. There is no running water. There is no refrigeration. There is no mechanical advantage beyond the wheel and the lever and the strength of animals. Everything is done by hand, slowly, carefully, with a patience that borders on the meditative, and you would find your hands aching, and your back stiffening, and your attention fraying long before the sun reached its highest point. And yet there is something in this life that you would also find strangely beautiful, if you could slow yourself down enough to see it. The Ger is warm and close, and full of the sounds of a family living together in a small, round space. The light that comes through the crown opening moves across the interior as the sun crosses the sky, a slow, bright column that tracks the hours like a sundial. The felt walls glow faintly amber when the afternoon sun hits them. The smell of the fire and the milk and the wool creates a kind of dense, lived-in comfort that is unlike anything in your clean, ventilated, climate-controlled world. There is a togetherness here that is born not of choice, but of necessity, and it has a texture and a warmth that you would feel even as everything else about this life bewilders and exhausts you. But beauty does not keep you alive. Competence keeps you alive. And by the end of this first day, as the family settles around the fire and passes a bowl of airag and tears strips of dried meat with their teeth and talks quietly in a language you do not speak, you would begin to feel the true weight of your uselessness. You cannot milk. You cannot churn. You cannot build or pack or load or drive or mend or spin or butcher or cook. Not as these things need to be done here. Not with the speed and sureness that this life demands. Every task that a Mongol child learns by the age of 6 is a task you would need to be taught from nothing. And there is no surplus of time or patience or resources to teach you. In a settled society, a useless person can sometimes be absorbed, tucked into a corner, given simple work, fed from the common store. In a nomadic society, where every person must carry their weight because the weight itself must move, your inability is not a minor inconvenience. It is a burden, and burdens on the steppe are something that no family can afford to carry for long.
You are standing beside a horse, and the first thing you notice is that it is not what you expected. You have seen horses before, or at least, you believe you have. You have seen them in films, in paintings, at county fairs or riding stables, tall and glossy, and standing calmly behind white fences. You may have even ridden one, briefly, on some guided trail through gentle woods, the horse plodding forward with the bored indifference of an animal that has done this 1,000 times. That is not what is in front of you now. The animal before you is short. Its head comes perhaps to your chest. Its legs are thick, and its body is compact and barrel-shaped, covered in a rough, dense coat that looks almost matted in places, as if it has never been brushed, which it has not. Its mane is tangled, its hooves are hard and unshorn. There is no saddle, or rather, there is one, but it is small and sits high on the horse's back, made of wood and leather, with short stirrups that seem designed for someone whose legs know how to grip the flanks of an animal, rather than simply dangle. The horse shifts its weight and turns its head to look at you, and in its eyes there is something entirely undomesticated, a wariness, an intelligence, and perhaps a kind of contempt. This is a Mongol horse. It was born on the steppe, survived its first winter without shelter, and has been living half wild in a herd since before it was broken, which happened not through the slow, patient process you might imagine, but through a matter of days, a young rider climbing on, being thrown, climbing on again, being thrown, climbing on again, until the horse accepted the arrangement, not out of submission, but out of something closer to mutual agreement. This horse does not fear you. It does not respect you. It is simply waiting to see what you will do. You try to mount it. You place your left foot in the stirrup and reach up for the saddle, and immediately the horse steps sideways. Not quickly, not violently, but just enough to make you stumble and lose your grip. You try again. This time you manage to swing your leg over, but you're sitting too far back on the animal's spine, and the saddle is harder than anything you have sat on before, and your legs do not know where to go. The stirrups are too short for you, or rather, they are exactly the right length for someone who has been riding since they were 3 years old, and whose knees and hips and ankles have been shaped by a lifetime of this position. Your thighs begin to ache almost immediately. Your lower back protests. You grip the front of the saddle with both hands and try to settle your weight. And then someone slaps the horse's flank and it begins to move. And within 5 strides, you understand that you know nothing. The gait of a Mongol horse is not smooth. It is short and choppy and jarring, and your body, which has spent its life in chairs and car seats and on mattresses, has no idea how to absorb the motion. You bounce. Your spine compresses with each step.
Your hands tighten on the saddle, and your shoulders rise toward your ears, and every muscle in your body clenches in an effort to stay upright, which is precisely the wrong thing to do, because a rider who clenches is a rider who falls. A Mongol child, a child of 4 or 5, would be sitting loose and easy right now, hips rolling with the horse's rhythm, spine fluid, hands resting lightly on the reins or simply on their own thighs. They would not be thinking about balance, because balance, for them, is not a thought. It is a condition of their body, something absorbed through years of being placed on horseback before they could walk steadily on their own feet. The chronicler Giovanni de Plano Carpini, a Franciscan friar who travelled to the Mongol court in the 1240s, noted, with a kind of exhausted wonder, that Mongol children were tied to horses almost as soon as they could sit upright, and that by the time they were old enough to herd animals, they rode as naturally as breathing. He was not exaggerating. He was, if anything, understating the matter. The horse beneath you breaks into a trot, and now the jarring doubles in frequency and intensity, and you are gripping with your knees so hard that your muscles begin to tremble. You cannot steer. You pull the reins to the left, and the horse ignores you, or turns right, or simply stops and drops its head to graze, which is what it would rather be doing. Mongol horses are not trained to respond to heavy hands on the reins. They are guided by the subtlest pressures of the rider's legs, the shift of weight in the saddle, the barely perceptible tilt of the body. The communication between a Mongol rider and their horse is a language of the body, spoken fluently by both parties, and you do not speak a single word of it. You are, from the horse's perspective, a sack of grain that keeps lurching unpredictably. The horse tolerates you for now, but if you were to try to ride it at speed, across open ground, over uneven terrain, the way every adult in this society rides every single day, you would last perhaps 30 seconds before you were thrown. And being thrown from a horse on the steppe is not like being thrown from a horse in a riding ring. There is no soft footing, no padded arena. There is hard ground and rocks and the endless grass. And if the horse runs off, which it will, you are alone, on foot, in a landscape that has no edges and no mercy. Now consider what these riders actually do from horseback. They do not simply ride, they live on their horses. A Mongol warrior on campaign might spend the better part of a day in the saddle, covering 60 or 70 miles, sometimes more, changing between mounts from a personal string of 5 or 6 horses so that no single animal is exhausted. They eat in the saddle, they sleep in the saddle, or something close to it, slumping forward over the horse's neck in a kind of half-doze while the animal walks on. They fight from the saddle, they hunt from the saddle. The European knights who would eventually face them on the battlefield were themselves accomplished horsemen, men who had trained from boyhood in the arts of mounted combat, and even they were staggered by what they saw. The Mongols rode in ways that seemed impossible, They could twist in the saddle and fire an arrow behind them at full gallop, the famous Parthian shot, striking a pursuer with terrifying accuracy while appearing to flee. They could lean so far to one side that they seemed to disappear behind the body of the horse, shielding themselves from enemy fire. They could drop from the saddle, hit the ground running, and vault back on without the horse breaking stride. These were not tricks. These were not the performances of specialists. These were the basic competencies of ordinary people. Skills as common and unremarkable to them as driving a car is to you. And then there is the bow. Someone hands it to you, and it is heavier than you expected. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that it is denser, more tightly wound with potential energy. The Mongol composite bow is a work of extraordinary engineering, a layered construction of wood, horn, and sinew, each material chosen for its specific mechanical properties. The belly of the bow, the side facing the archer, is lined with strips of horn, usually from a yak or an ibex, which resists compression. The back of the bow is layered with sinew, the dried tendons of animals, which resists tension. Between them is a wooden core, and the whole assembly is bound together with animal glue made from boiled fish bladders and cured over a period of months, sometimes more than a year, shaped and recurved so that when unstrung, the bow bends forward, away from the archer, storing enormous energy in its compact frame. The finished weapon is short enough to be used from horseback, but powerful enough to send an arrow through leather armor at 150 yards, and, at closer range, through heavier protection than that. It is, for its era, one of the most sophisticated ranged weapons in the world, and you cannot draw it. You try. You nock an arrow, though even this takes you longer than it should, fumbling with the string and the shaft and your own fingers. A Mongol archer uses a thumb draw, hooking the string with the pad of the thumb and locking it in place with the index finger. A technique that allows for a faster, cleaner release and works naturally with the shorter bow. You probably instinctively reach for the string with 3 fingers, the Mediterranean draw you may have seen in Western archery, and it feels wrong because the bow is not designed for it. You pull. The string moves back a few inches and then stops, not because the bow has reached its limit, but because your arms have reached theirs. The draw weight of a Mongol war bow is estimated at somewhere between 100 and 160 pounds, depending on the source and the specific weapon. For comparison, a modern recreational bow typically has a draw weight of 30 to 50 pounds. Even a strong person, someone who exercises regularly and considers themselves fit, would struggle to draw a Mongol bow to its full extent. You are not drawing it to its full extent. You are barely drawing it at all. Your arms shake. Your fingers slip. If you do manage to release the arrow, it wobbles off the string and drops into the grass a few dozen yards ahead of you. A feeble, embarrassing thing. Around you, if anyone is watching, there might be quiet amusement, or perhaps just indifference, because what else would they expect?
A Mongol archer, by contrast, can draw and release this bow in a single fluid motion, repeatedly, dozens of times in succession, from the back of a galloping horse, hitting targets at distances that seem unreasonable. Children begin practicing with small bows almost as soon as they can stand, shooting at ground squirrels and birds, graduating to larger and more powerful weapons as they grow. By the time they are adults, the muscles of their back and shoulders and forearms have been shaped by years of this specific, repetitive motion, and the act of drawing and firing is no more conscious or effortful than throwing a ball. The great hunts, the battue, which we might touch on later, were as much military exercises as they were hunts. Enormous, coordinated drives across miles of territory, in which thousands of riders encircled game and closed in slowly over days. And every rider was expected to shoot with precision from horseback, to kill cleanly, to follow commands relayed by flag and signal. If you could not do this, you were not simply a poor hunter, you were a liability. You were someone who could not contribute to the most basic communal activity of your people. And this is the thing you must understand. Standing here with this bow you cannot draw. Sitting on this horse you cannot ride. In your world, horsemanship and archery are hobbies. They are recreational pursuits, pleasant diversions, things you might try on a weekend or admire from a distance. In this world, they are the foundation of everything. They are how food is obtained. They are how territory is defended. They are how wars are fought and empires built. They are, in a very real sense, identity itself. To be Mongol is to ride and to shoot. The two things are so deeply intertwined with what it means to belong to this culture that a person who cannot do them is not merely unskilled. They are, in social terms, something close to invisible. They have no role. They have no value in the specific economy of this society, where what matters is not what you know or what you think, but what your body can do, what your hands and legs and eyes have been trained to accomplish since before memory begins. Your standing within a Mongol community will be determined, in large part, by these physical competencies. A man who rides well, shoots well, and can endure the hardships of the steppe without complaint occupies a respected place. A woman who rides well, manages the household with efficiency, and can handle livestock with confidence occupies a respected place. You, arriving from your century with your soft hands and your untrained legs, and your bewilderment at the smell of horse sweat and fermented mare's milk, would occupy no place at all. You would be a curiosity at best, a burden at worst. You could not ride out with the herders. You could not join a hunt. You could not be trusted with a horse from the communal string because you would ruin it, teaching it bad habits, confusing it with your clumsy signals, exhausting it when it should be conserved. You could not be sent as a messenger, because a messenger must ride fast and far and arrive capable of delivering words clearly and then riding back. You could not serve in any military capacity whatsoever, because the Mongol army, as we will come to see, is built entirely around mounted archery, and a warrior who cannot ride and shoot
is not a warrior at all. Perhaps you imagine that you could learn. And in theory, you are right. The human body is adaptable. Given enough time, enough practice, enough patient instruction, you could learn to sit a horse without falling, to draw a bow without shaking, to guide a mount with your knees, and fire an arrow at something other than the ground. But the time required would be measured in years, not days, and you do not have years. You have, as the premise of our journey suggests, approximately 1 day, and in 1 day you cannot undo a lifetime of physical inexperience. The Mongol child who watched you fumble with the bow this morning has been shooting since before they lost their first teeth. The gap between you and them is not a gap of talent or intelligence. It is a gap of 10,000 hours of practice, inscribed in muscle and bone and reflex, and no amount of willingness can close it in an afternoon. There is something else worth sitting with for a moment, and that is the relationship between the Mongol and the horse that goes beyond the practical, beyond the military, beyond the merely functional. These horses are not tools, or rather, they are tools, but they are also companions and markers of wealth and objects of genuine affection. A family's herd is its lifeblood. The horses provide transportation, obviously, but also milk, which is fermented into airag, and meat in lean times, and hide and hair for ropes and coverings. A person's string of horses, the small group assigned to them for their personal use, is known intimately. Each animal's temperament, its strengths, its weaknesses, its preferences, all of this is understood in the way you might understand the habits of a close friend. When a favorite horse dies, there is grief. When a horse performs brilliantly in a hunt or a race, the annual Nardam festivals include horse races over vast distances. There is pride, not in the rider, but in the horse itself. Because the Mongols understand that the horse is doing most of the work and deserves most of the credit. The winning horses are celebrated. Songs are composed for them. Their names are remembered. You stand here beside this short, rough-coated, half-wild creature, and you do not understand it. You do not know how to read its ears, which flatten when it is irritated, and prick forward when it is alert. You do not know how to approach it from the correct side, or how to check its hooves, or how to tell from the way it shifts its weight whether it is lame or simply resting a leg. You do not know that this particular horse can survive on sparse grass that would starve a European warhorse, that it can paw through snow to find forage in winter, that it can travel extraordinary distances on minimal water, that its endurance, if not its speed, exceeds almost any other breed in the world. You do not know any of this. And because you do not know it, the horse remains opaque to you, an alien presence, and you remain opaque to it, a strange and useless creature that it has no particular reason to obey. Let yourself feel that for a moment. The helplessness of it. Not the dramatic helplessness of danger or crisis, but the quieter helplessness of simply not knowing how to do the things that everyone around you does without thinking. Imagine being in a world where every child can do what you cannot, where the most basic acts of daily life require skills you have never even considered acquiring. This is not a failure of character. It is simply the distance between worlds, the vast and silent gap between the life your body was shaped for and the life that this place demands. The horse shifts again beside you, drops its head, tears at a clump of grass with its teeth. The wind moves through the steppe. Somewhere in the distance, a rider is moving at full gallop, low over the horse's neck. And from here, they look like a single creature, horse and human, fused into one shape, flowing over the ground as naturally as water over stone. You watch them go, and you understand, in a way that no description could fully convey, what it means to be an outsider here. The bow is too heavy. The horse is too quick. The skills are too deep. And the day is still young. You have survived the wind and the cold. You have failed to build the ger, failed to milk the mare, failed to draw the bow or stay seated on the horse. But all of those failures, painful and humbling as they are, exist in the realm of the physical. They are failures of muscle and technique and habit. There is another kind of failure waiting for you now, and it is quieter than all the rest, and in some ways far more dangerous. Because the Mongol Empire is not only a place of grass and horses and felt tents. It is also a place of rules, and the rules are everywhere, woven into every gesture, every greeting, every meal, every moment of shared space between one person and another. You cannot see them, you do not know them, and that is exactly the problem. Let us begin with something small. You are standing outside a ger. You have been brought here, perhaps, by a family who found you wandering and took pity on you, or perhaps by riders who were curious enough to let you live. Either way, you are now at the entrance of a dwelling, and someone is holding back the flap of felt and motioning for you to come inside. You step forward. Your foot lands on the wooden threshold at the base of the doorway. And just like that, before you have even entered, you have committed an offence so serious that in certain circumstances it could cost you your life. You did not know. How could you have known? The threshold of a ger is sacred. It is the boundary between the outside world and the interior world of the family. And to step on it is to bring misfortune, to insult the spirit of the household, to show a contempt so deep that it cannot be easily forgiven. Mongol children learn this before they learn to ride. Visitors from foreign lands are sometimes warned in advance, and even then they forget, because the threshold is low and the doorway is narrow, and the impulse to step over a thing by stepping on it is almost reflexive. But reflexes do not matter here. Intent does not matter here. What matters is the act. And the act has been witnessed, and the people around you have gone quiet.
This is your introduction to the Yasa.
The Yasa, sometimes written Jasag, sometimes rendered in other ways depending on the source and the century and the scholar, is the great law code attributed to Chinggis Khan himself. It was not written down in any single surviving document that historians have been able to recover in full, and there is ongoing debate about its exact contents, its scope, its evolution over time. But what is not in doubt is that it existed, that it was known, that it was enforced, and that it touched every part of life within the empire. The Yasa governed how you ate, how you drank, how you washed, how you spoke to those above you and below you, how you conducted yourself in war and in peace, how you slaughtered animals, and how you urinated, and how you treated water, and how you divided plunder, and how you punished theft. It was not a legal code in the way you might think of one, not a set of statutes printed and posted for public review. It was something closer to a living framework, carried in memory, interpreted by judges, and backed by the absolute authority of the Khan.
And it is the thing that would undo you most completely. Because the step, at least, gives you visible clues to its dangers. You can see the cold coming. You can feel the horse beneath you. But the Yasa is invisible. It operates in the spaces between people, in the angle of a hand, in the direction of a glance, in the order in which kumis is poured and to whom it is offered first. And you have no map for any of it. Let us walk through your day, slowly, and count the violations. You have entered the ger. You have stepped on the threshold. But let us say, generously, that the family forgives this. Perhaps they assume you are a fool rather than a threat. You are inside now, and the interior is dim and warm, and you are disoriented by the smell of smoke and animal fat and fermented milk. Someone gestures for you to sit. You move to the left side of the ger, and this too is wrong. The interior of a Mongol ger is divided according to a spatial logic that is as fixed and deliberate as the walls of any palace. The door always faces south. The back of the ger, the north side, is the place of honor, reserved for the head of the household and for the most important guests. The left side, as you face the back from the door, is traditionally the men's side. The right side is the women's side. The arrangement of objects within the ger, the hearth in the center, the altar at the back, the storage and tools along the sides, reflects a cosmological order that connects the family to the sky, the earth, and the spirits that inhabit both. You do not know any of this. You sit where there appears to be space, and depending on where you sit, and who you sit near, and what you inadvertently place yourself beside, you may have done something merely awkward, or you may have done something offensive enough
to change the way the family looks at you for the rest of your very brief stay.
Now someone offers you a bowl. It is kumis, fermented mare's milk. And you already know from what we have discussed that you might struggle with the taste. But the offering itself is the test you do not realize you are taking. In Mongol culture, the offering of drink is a gesture of hospitality, so fundamental that to refuse it is to refuse the relationship itself. You must accept the bowl. You must accept it with your right hand, or with both hands, not your left hand. The left hand is considered unclean in many Central and Inner Asian traditions, and to receive a gift or a bowl of drink with it is a slight. You must bring the bowl to your lips. You must at least taste it. You may touch your lips to the surface and set the bowl down, and that is acceptable. But to wave it away, to grimace, to set it aside without drinking, these are not neutral acts. They are refusals, and refusals have consequences. And the kumis is only the beginning. If food is offered, and food will be offered, because hospitality among the Mongols is not optional, it is a duty that reflects on the honor of the family. You must eat with your right hand. You must not reach across another person to take food. You must not spill anything on the ground inside the ger, because the ground inside is the floor of someone's home, and also, in a spiritual sense, the earth itself. And to waste food upon it is an affront to the spirits. If meat is offered and you are given a knife to cut it, you must take care how you handle the blade, how you pass it, how you set it down. There are customs surrounding knives that you have never encountered, and they vary from family to family and clan to clan. And the safest thing you can do is move slowly and watch what others do and copy them as carefully as you can. But even this strategy has its limits, because some of the rules apply specifically to guests, and what the family does for themselves may not be what they expect you to do. Now let us move beyond the meal. Let us say you need to relieve yourself. You step outside the ger. You walk a short distance. And here too, the Yasa has something to say. There are prohibitions, recorded by multiple observers of Mongol customs, against urinating into water. Any water. Streams, rivers, lakes. The Mongols regarded water as sacred, or at the very least as something that should not be defiled, and to urinate into a body of water was a violation serious enough to warrant punishment. Some accounts suggest the penalty could be death, though the enforcement likely varied with context and circumstance. But the principle was firm. Water was not to be polluted. And if you, in your ignorance, wander to the nearest stream to wash your hands or relieve yourself, you may be committing a crime without even knowing a law exists. The same prohibition extended in various forms to washing clothing directly in running water. To the Mongol way of thinking, water flowed from the sky, the eternal blue sky, Tengri, and it connected the world of the living to the world of the spirits, and to defile it with soap or filth was to disturb a balance that most people in your own time and place
have never been taught to perceive. You would wash your clothes in a stream without a second thought. Here, that thought could be your last. And then there is fire. The hearth at the center of the ger is not merely a source of warmth, it is a sacred space. To throw refuse into the fire, to poke it with a knife, to step over it, to extend your feet toward it. All of these are violations of varying severity. The fire is alive, in a sense that the Mongols understood, and you do not. It has a spirit. It must be treated with respect. You would not know this. You might toss a bit of bone into the flames, thinking you were tidying up. You might stretch your legs toward the warmth after a long, cold walk. And the people around you would see not a tired traveler, but a person who does not know how to behave in the presence of something holy. This is the cumulative weight of the yasa and the customs that surround it. It is not one rule, it is hundreds of rules, thousands of small calibrations, a lifetime of learned behavior that you have not lived. And the people who have lived it do not think of these things as rules at all. They think of them the way you think of breathing. You do not decide to breathe. You do not remind yourself to breathe. You simply breathe. And when someone around you stops breathing, you notice immediately. That is what your violations feel like to the people around you. They are not watching for your mistakes. They are simply existing in a world where certain things are done and certain things are not. And when you do the things that are not done, the effect is immediate and visceral and deeply unsettling. Let us move further. Let us say you survive the ger and the meal and the fire and the threshold. Let us say you are brought before someone of importance, a local leader perhaps, a noyon, a commander of 100 or 1,000, or perhaps, in the worst and most terrifying case, you are brought before the Khan himself, or one of his descendants, in a great gathering or a court. Here the rules multiply and the penalties steepen, and the margin for error vanishes almost entirely. In the presence of the Khan, there are protocols for approach, for distance, for the angle of the body, for the direction of the gaze. You do not look the Khan in the eye unless he addresses you. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not turn your back to him when you leave. If you are offered a seat, you sit where you are told and nowhere else. If you are offered drink, you drink. If the Khan drinks first, you wait. The order in which people are served reflects the hierarchy of the empire, and to violate that order, even accidentally, is to challenge the structure that holds everything together. Foreign ambassadors who visited the Mongol court in the 13th century left accounts of these protocols, and even they, men who were trained in the diplomatic customs of their own civilizations, who had interpreters and guides and advance warning, even they found the experience harrowing. Giovanni da Pian del Carpin, the Franciscan friar sent by Pope Innocent IV, travelled for more than a year to reach the court of the great Khan Guyuk in 1246. He and his companion were instructed before their arrival, "Do not step on the threshold of the tent.
Do not touch the ropes. Pass between two fires set at the entrance, a purification ritual that the Mongols required of all visitors because fire was believed to cleanse evil intent. Karpin obeyed. He had been warned. But even with preparation, even with the explicit guidance of Mongol attendants, the experience was one of constant anxiety, a feeling that the wrong word, the wrong movement, the wrong glance could end everything.
William of Rubruck, another Franciscan who visited the court of Monk Khan a few years later, described similar rituals and similar anxieties. He noted the specific rules about where to sit, when to speak, how to present gifts. He observed that the Mongols were meticulous about these things, not out of cruelty, but out of a genuine belief that order mattered, that the proper arrangement of people and things and gestures reflected the proper arrangement of the world itself. Disorder was not merely impolite, it was dangerous. It was a crack in the fabric of existence through which misfortune could enter.
And this is something worth pausing on, because it tells you something important about the world you have been dropped into. The yasa was not a set of arbitrary rules imposed by a tyrant to control his people. It was, or at least it was understood to be, a reflection of the natural order as the Mongols perceived it. Genghis Khan did not invent these customs out of nothing. Many of them predated him by centuries, rooted in the shamanistic traditions of the steppe peoples, in the worship of Tengri, the eternal blue sky, in the reverence for fire and water and earth. What Genghis Khan did was codify them, unify them, and enforce them across the vast and diverse populations that his conquests brought under a single authority. The yasa was his tool for holding together an empire of people who spoke different languages, worshipped different gods, and lived in different ways. It was the common grammar of behavior that made coexistence possible, and its enforcement was relentless. The penalties for violation were severe and often physical. Theft was punished harshly, sometimes with death. Adultery was punished with death. Desertion from military service was punished with death. Espionage, treason, the harbouring of fugitives, death. But it was not only the great crimes that carried weight. The small transgressions, the social missteps, the failures of etiquette, these were punished too. Not always with death, but with beatings, with fines, with exile, with a loss of standing that in a society as tightly bound as this one could be its own kind of death. Because to lose your place in Mongol society was to lose everything. You existed within a web of obligations, of kin and clan and commander, and every thread in that web held you up. Cut enough threads, and you fell, and there was nothing beneath you but the open steppe and the indifferent sky. You have no threads. That is the crux of it. You have arrived in this world without connections, without clan, without a commander to whom you owe loyalty, without a family whose honour extends to cover you. You are not merely ignorant of the rules. You are outside the structure entirely. And a person outside the structure is, in the most literal sense, lawless. Not because you intend to break laws, but because you exist in a space where the law does not recognize you, does not protect you,
does not know what to do with you except regard you with suspicion. This is what foreign travellers understood instinctively when they arrived at the Mongol court. They came bearing gifts and letters of introduction, not because they were generous, but because they needed to be placed within the structure. They needed a role. They needed to be identified as ambassadors, as guests, as representatives of a distant power with whom the Khan might choose to treat. Without that identification, they were nothing, and nothing did not survive long in the Mongol Empire. And you have no letters. You have no gifts. You have no title, and no role, and no explanation for your presence that would make sense to anyone. You are a stranger who appeared on the steppe without a horse, without a bow, without knowledge of the customs, without the ability to explain yourself in any language anyone here speaks. You are, in every meaningful sense, a ghost. And ghosts, in the Mongol spiritual tradition, are not comforting presences. They are disturbances. They are things to be warded off, driven out, purified away. So even your existence here, your mere physical presence in this time and place, is a kind of violation. You are a disruption in the order of things. And the yasa and the people who live by it are designed above all else to restore order, to mend the fabric, to ensure that everything and everyone is in their proper place. You are not in your proper place. You are nowhere near your proper place. And the quiet machinery of law and custom and belief that holds this empire together will grind forward whether you understand it or not. This is the danger you would not have seen coming. You might have imagined the cold, the horses, the vast distances. You might have braced yourself for physical hardship, but you would not have imagined this: the invisible web of expectation and obligation and taboo that surrounds you from the moment you set foot inside the first ger, from the moment you accept the first bowl, from the moment you stand before the first person of authority and have no idea where to put your hands, or your eyes, or your body. The steppe can kill you with cold. The horse can kill you with a fall. But the law can kill you with a gesture, with a step, with the simple act of not knowing what everyone else has known since birth. And the worst part, perhaps, is that the Mongols are not cruel about it. The accounts left by foreign visitors, for all their anxiety, also describe a people who could be remarkably generous, remarkably hospitable, remarkably tolerant of difference, provided you showed willing, provided you respected the forms, provided you made the effort to understand. The Mongol Empire was one of the most religiously tolerant empires in the history of the world. Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Taoists, shamans, all practiced freely under Mongol rule, so long as they obeyed the yasa and respected the Khan. The Mongols did not care what you believed. They cared how you behaved. And that distinction, so simple in principle, is so difficult in practice for a person who has never been taught the behavior that is expected. You would try. Of course you would try. You would watch the people around you and do your best to imitate them. You would eat with your right hand and step over the threshold and accept the bowl of kumis with both hands extended. And you would get some of it right, but you would get enough of it wrong at enough critical moments in front of enough people who matter that the cumulative effect would be the same. You would be marked. You would be the one who does not know. And in a world where knowing is the price of belonging, not knowing is the beginning of the end. The fire crackles in the center of the gur. The smoke rises through the opening at the top, a thin grey thread dissolving into the pale sky. Someone refills the bowl of kumis. Someone murmurs something you cannot understand. The faces around you are not hostile. Not yet. But they are watchful. And the watching has a weight to it that you can feel on your skin, in your chest, in the slow turning of your stomach. You are inside now, out of the wind, surrounded by warmth and the smell of felt and wood smoke and fermented milk. And you have never felt more exposed in your life. You are standing at the edge of a camp that has already begun to move. You did not hear a horn. You did not hear a shout. There was no single moment when the stillness broke into motion. Instead, the change came the way dawn comes, gradually and then all at once. And by the time you understood what was happening, the world around you was already flowing forward, like a river finding its course. Thousands of horses, tens of thousands, shifting into lines that stretch so far ahead and behind that the columns seem to pour over the horizon itself, disappearing into a haze of dust and morning light and the low amber grass of a land you cannot name. This is the Mongol army on the march, and you are somewhere inside it. You are not a warrior. You have not been given a rank or a position, but that does not matter, because in the Mongol military system, there is no such thing as a civilian in the column. Everyone moves, everyone serves. If you are here, you are part of the machine, and the machine does not pause to ask whether you are ready. It assumes you have been ready since childhood, because everyone around you has been. The man to your left, who looks no older than 16, sits on his horse with the loose, boneless ease of someone who has never known any other way to travel. The woman behind you, mounted on a dun-coloured mare with a foal trotting alongside, carries a bundle of dried felt and a skin of irag, and she has not spoken a word since the column began to move. No one has. The silence is not tense. It is practiced. It is the silence of people who have done this before, many times, across distances that would take your breath away if you understood them.
and you do not understand them. Not yet. Not really. The column you are part of is one of perhaps 5, perhaps 10, moving across the landscape along parallel routes separated by distances of 30 or 40 miles. You cannot see the others. You can barely see the full extent of your own. But somewhere out there, beyond the curve of the earth, other rivers of horses and riders are flowing in the same direction, coordinated by a system of communication so efficient that a message sent from the commanding general can reach the farthest unit within a day, sometimes less. Riders on fast horses carry orders sealed in leather pouches, galloping between the columns, along routes that have been scouted weeks in advance. These riders change mounts at relay points, leaping from one horse to another without stopping, and they ride through the night if the message demands it. The system resembles, in its structure and discipline, the postal network that the Empire would later formalize across its vast territories. But here on campaign, it serves a singular purpose. It keeps the columns moving as one body, even when that body is spread across 100 miles of open ground. You try to hold this in your mind. 100 miles, 5 columns, tens of thousands of riders, and all of it coordinated, without roads, without maps as you would recognize them, without written orders passed down through a bureaucratic chain. The orders are verbal, or carried in the simplest written form, and they are understood because every man in the army knows his place within a structure so clean and logical that it has not changed in its essentials since Chinggis Khan first imposed it decades ago. That structure is decimal. You have perhaps heard the term before, in some other context, but here it is the skeleton of everything. 10 riders form an arban. 10 arbans form a zun, a unit of 100. 10 zuns form a mingan, a unit of 1,000. 10 mingans form a tumen, a unit of 10,000. And the tumen is the great operational unit of the Mongol army, the building block from which campaigns are constructed, and across which authority flows downward from the Khan himself through his appointed generals. Every man knows which arban he belongs to. Every arban knows its zun. Every zun its mingan. The hierarchy is absolute and immediately legible to anyone raised within it. If a single rider deserts, his entire arban is held responsible. If an arban fails, the zun answers. The consequence of failure cascades upward in exactly the way that obedience cascades downward, and the result is a discipline so deeply internalized that it does not require enforcement in the moment. The men do not obey because they are watched. They obey because the structure is part of them, woven into their identity as surely as their skill with horses or their knowledge of the stars. And you are standing outside that structure entirely. You do not know your arban. You do not know your zun commander's name. If someone gave you an order right now, in the clipped Mongol dialect used on campaign, you would not understand the words, let alone the context, let alone the chain of obligation that makes compliance not merely expected, but existential.
You are a loose thread in a fabric that tolerates no looseness, and the quiet efficiency of everyone around you only makes your uselessness more visible. The pace of the march is not what you expected. You imagined galloping, perhaps, the thunderous charge you have seen in paintings or films, a great wave of horsemen surging across the plain. But the reality is slower and stranger and far more punishing. The column moves at a steady walk, occasionally a trot, hour after hour after hour, and the monotony of it is itself a weapon. Your body, unaccustomed to sitting a horse for more than an hour at most, begins to ache within the first morning. Your thighs burn, your lower back seizes. The saddle beneath you, a Mongol saddle, is wooden framed and hard, and sits high off the horse's back, designed not for comfort, but for stability, and for allowing the rider to stand in the stirrups and shoot. You cannot stand in the stirrups. You can barely keep your balance at a walk, and the day is not half over. The Mongol rider beside you will cover 60 miles today. On a hard march, he might cover 80. In cases of extreme urgency, when the general demands it, the column might push to 100 miles in a single day. The riders rotating through their string of remounts, each man leading 3 or 4 or 5 horses, so that no single animal is exhausted. You have 1 horse. You do not know how to manage a string. The very concept that a single rider might lead several horses on long leather leads while riding another at speed across broken terrain seems to you like a circus trick. But here, it is simply how movement works. Every rider is his own logistics unit, carrying his own food, his own water, his own shelter, his own replacement mounts. The army does not have a supply train in the way you understand it. The army is its own supply train. And this is why it can move so fast, so far, across landscapes that would swallow any other force on Earth. You eat what they eat, or rather, you try. The rations on campaign are sparse and strange, and designed for endurance, not pleasure. Dried meat, borts, has been prepared months in advance. Lean cuts of beef or mutton, desiccated in the cold wind, and then ground into a powder that can be carried in a small leather pouch. A handful of this powder dissolved in hot water makes a thin, salty broth that sustains a rider for hours. There is dried curd, arul, hard as stone and sour enough to make your jaw clench. And there is irag, the fermented mare's milk that serves as both food and drink, and mild intoxicant. You chew the dried curd, and it resists your teeth and your tongue and your will. And you swallow it with difficulty, and you are still hungry. And you will remain hungry for the duration of the campaign, because the Mongol body has been trained since infancy to function on less food than you have ever imagined going without. And then there is the blood. You have heard stories about this, and you hoped they were exaggerations, but they are not. On long marches, when supplies run low, or when stopping to prepare food is not possible,
Mongol riders open a small vein in the neck of one of their horses, draw a quantity of blood into a leather vessel, and drink it. The wound is closed with a paste of mud or dung, and the horse continues on, apparently unbothered. The blood is warm and thick and metallic and alive, and it provides protein and salt and liquid all at once. You watch the rider beside you perform this act with the casual efficiency of someone pouring water from a jug, and you understand, in a way that no description could have prepared you for, that you are inside a military culture that has fused the human body and the animal body and the landscape itself into a single system of movement and sustenance. There is no separation between the army and the land it crosses. The army feeds on the land the way a herd feeds on the grass, moving constantly, consuming as it goes, never stopping long enough to exhaust what lies beneath it. The days bleed into one another. You ride, you rest briefly, sometimes without dismounting, slumping forward in the saddle while the horse walks on. You sleep on the ground, wrapped in a single felt blanket, the cold pressing against you from every direction. Around you, the camp assembles itself each night with the same silent efficiency. The horses picketed in long lines, the small fires lit with dried dung, the sentries posted at distances that seem impossibly far, but that are, you are told, exactly correct, according to a formula that accounts for terrain and visibility and the distance a man's voice carries in the wind. In the morning, the camp vanishes, not slowly, not with the reluctant packing and sorting that you associate with breaking camp, but swiftly, completely, as though the ground itself has swallowed every trace of human presence. Within an hour of waking, the column is moving again, and the place where thousands of men and horses spent the night looks like nothing more than a patch of trampled grass, slowly lifting itself back toward the sky. You begin to understand, dimly, that the speed of the Mongol army is not merely a physical fact, but a psychological weapon. The distances the columns cover, the directions from which they converge, the sudden appearance of forces where no force was expected, all of this is calculated to produce terror in the enemy long before the first arrow is loosed. Scouts ride days ahead of the main body, mapping the terrain, locating water sources, identifying the enemy's positions and strengths. These scouts report back through the same relay system that carries the general's orders forward, and the information they bring shapes the campaign in real time, allowing the army to adjust its routes, its speed, its angles of approach, with a fluidity that seems almost supernatural to those on the receiving end. And on the receiving end, the terror is deliberately amplified. You have heard, in fragments passed between riders in the evening, stories of what happens before the army arrives at a city or a fortress. Refugees are allowed to escape, sometimes encouraged to escape, so that they will carry word of the approaching horde to the next city, and the next, The numbers are exaggerated, not by the refugees, but by the Mongols themselves, who light extra campfires at night to suggest a force twice or 3 times its actual size, who mount dummies on spare horses to lengthen their columns, who send small detachments on wide flanking routes so that reports come in from every direction at once, suggesting encirclement, even when the main body is still days away. The cities that receive these reports must decide, often in a state of mounting panic, whether to surrender or resist. And the Mongol calculus is brutally simple. Surrender, and you will be absorbed, taxed, administered, left mostly intact. Resist, and you will be destroyed so completely that the next city down the road will not dare to resist at all.
You think about this as you ride. You think about the fact that you are part of this machine, however marginally, however uselessly, and that the machine's purpose is not merely to move across the landscape, but to reshape the psychological terrain of entire civilizations. The Mongol army does not simply conquer. It makes conquest seem inevitable. And it does this not through savagery alone, though savagery is certainly part of the calculus, but through a mastery of information and perception that you associate with a much later age. The scouts, the messengers, the relay horses, the coordinated columns, the calculated terror. These are not the tools of a primitive steppe horde. These are the tools of an intelligence apparatus that understands, centuries before the concept has a name, that war is fought first, in the mind. But your mind is not fighting. Your mind is dulling. The fatigue is cumulative and relentless. And it is not the sharp fatigue of a single hard day's exertion, but the slow, grinding erosion of days upon days of insufficient food, insufficient sleep, and ceaseless movement. Your hands are raw from gripping the reins. Your lips are cracked from the wind. Your inner thighs are chafed to the point of bleeding, and each step of the horse sends a fresh note of pain through your legs and hips and spine. You are thirsty in a way that feels structural, as though the dryness has settled into your bones, and the sips of Irag you manage to take do not quench the thirst so much as change its character, adding a sour film to the persistent ache at the back of your throat. The riders around you show none of this. Their faces are wind-darkened and calm. They ride with their reins loose, their bodies swaying with the horse's rhythm, in a way that conserves energy rather than spending it. Some of them sing, quietly, low melodic patterns that seem to have no beginning and no end, and the sound blends with the wind and the creak of leather and the soft percussion of hooves on dry earth until it becomes part of the landscape itself, inseparable from the motion and the dust and the enormous sky overhead. You will not make it to the battle. You know this now with a certainty that is not dramatic but simply factual. the way you might know that you cannot lift a stone that is too heavy or swim a river that is too wide. The campaign has days yet to run, perhaps weeks, and the fighting, when it comes, will demand everything these riders have and more. The explosive bursts of speed, the archery at full gallop, the feigned retreats that lure an enemy into pursuit, and then the sudden wheeling turn, the encirclement, the annihilating rain of arrows from every direction. You have seen them practice these maneuvers, briefly, in the open ground beside the column, small groups wheeling and turning in patterns that look like the murmuration of birds, instinctive and collective, and beautiful in a way that makes your chest tighten, because you know you will never be part of it. The decimal system that organizes the army organizes the battle itself. Each Arban knows its role. Each Zun moves in coordination with the others. The Mingan commanders receive their orders and distribute them downward, and the whole force operates like a single organism with 10,000 limbs, each limb knowing its function, each function timed to the breath. The discipline is not rigid in the way of a Roman legion or a Napoleonic line. It is fluid, adaptive, responsive to the chaos of the field, because every rider has been trained not merely to follow orders, but to read the battle, to anticipate, to act within the framework of the larger plan without waiting to be told. This is what a lifetime on horseback produces. This is what a childhood spent hunting wolves across the open steppe prepares you for. Not the specific tactics, but the capacity for coordinated movement at speed, the ability to think and act and communicate while your body is doing something that would consume every shred of your concentration. And your concentration is consumed. It has been consumed since the first hour of the first day, consumed by the simple, humiliating effort of staying on a horse, of keeping your body upright, of not falling behind, of not becoming the weak point in the column that slows everyone around you and draws the quiet, measuring gaze of the Zun commander who rides past every few hours, counting his men, noting their condition, assessing who can continue and who cannot. You cannot continue. Not really. You are continuing only because the column carries you, the way a river carries a leaf, and you suspect that the riders near you have quietly adjusted their pace to keep you from falling too far behind. A small kindness that is also a small shame, because in this army, to be carried is to be cargo, and cargo is tolerated only so long as it serves a purpose. The sun is low now, a flat orange disk pressing against the rim of the world, and the column is still moving. You have been on horseback for 14 hours. The landscape has not changed, or rather, it has changed so gradually that the change is imperceptible. The grass a shade drier, the soil a shade more pale, the distant line of mountains a fraction closer than they were at dawn. Tomorrow you will ride again, and the day after, and the day after that. And somewhere ahead, at the end of all this riding, there is a city or a fortress or an army that does not yet know you are coming, that is living its last days of peace without knowing they are the last. And the column you are in, this quiet, relentless, dust-covered river of horses and riders, is the instrument of a change so vast and so permanent that the world on the other side of it will not resemble the world on this side. But you will not see that change. You will not be there when the columns converge and the arrows darken the sky and the gates fall. You will have fallen out of the column long before then, quietly, without ceremony, the way a stone falls out of a moving hand. The machine will continue without you. It does not need you. It never did. And the sound of it moving on, that low, rolling, collective thunder of hooves and breath and leather and purpose, will fade into the distance ahead of you until there is nothing left but the grass and the wind and the enormous, indifferent silence of the steppe, receiving you back into itself as though you had never been part of anything at all. You have been standing in one place for a long time now. The steppe is still around you, the grass still bending in that same low wind, the sky still reaching out in every direction farther than your mind can comfortably hold. You have felt the cold settle into your joints. You have failed to build the jar, failed to milk the mare, failed to stay mounted on the horse, failed to draw the bow, failed to observe the law, failed to keep pace with the column. You have not lasted a day. But before you leave this place, before you return to whatever century and whatever chair you are sitting in right now, there is one more thing worth seeing. Not something you must survive, but something you should understand. Because the empire you have failed to endure did not fail. It grew. It reached. It stretched across the surface of the earth farther than any empire before it, and farther than nearly any empire after it. And the world it built, however briefly, was one of the most extraordinary things human beings have ever done. Let yourself pull back now. Let your awareness lift, slowly, like a bird rising on a thermal above the grassland. You are still in the steppe, still near the center of it all, somewhere in what is now central Mongolia. But in your mind, you can begin to see the edges. To the east, the empire reaches all the way to the Pacific. The Korean peninsula is a vassal state. The forests of Manchuria have been absorbed. The Jin dynasty of northern China has fallen, and the Song dynasty in the south is falling still. Its great walled cities besieged one by one, its rivers crossed by armies that were born 1,000 miles from the nearest navigable water. To the south, the empire presses into the mountains of Tibet and the humid lowlands of Southeast Asia, though the heat and the jungle
resist it in ways that open ground never could. To the west, the empire has swept through Central Asia, through the great trading cities of Transoxiana, through Persia, through the Caucasus, through the Russian principalities, and to the very doorstep of Europe. Hungarian knights have been slaughtered on the plains of Mohi. Polish armies have been shattered at Legnica. For a brief and terrifying moment, there is nothing between the Mongol cavalry and the cities of Vienna and Venice, except a few 100 miles of open ground and the death of a Khan far away in Mongolia, which calls the armies home.
This is the empire. At its height, under the successors of Chinggis Khan, it covers something close to 24 million square kilometers. It encompasses perhaps 100 million people, speaking dozens of languages, practicing half a dozen major religions, farming rice and wheat and millet, herding sheep and cattle and camels, fishing the Pacific and the Caspian and the Persian Gulf. It contains the ruins of Baghdad, which was the most magnificent city in the Islamic world until the Mongols sacked it in 1258. It contains the living splendor of Karakorum, the Mongol capital, which is not a city in any way you would recognize, but which draws ambassadors and merchants and missionaries from every corner of the known world. It contains the seeds of what will become the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia. 4 successor states that will shape the politics of Eurasia for generations, even after the unified empire fractures. You could not survive a single day in the heart of it. But the heart of it built all of this. Now let yourself come down from that height and stand on a road. It is not paved, it is not smooth, but it is a road, and it has been travelled by more people, more goods, more ideas, and more diseases than almost any other road in human history. You are standing on the Silk Road, or rather, on one branch of the vast network of overland routes that connected China to the Mediterranean long before the Mongols arrived. But the Mongols did something to this road that no one had done before. They made it safe, or safer at least. Safe enough that a merchant could travel from one end to the other without being robbed or killed at every border crossing, without paying bribes to a dozen petty warlords, without risking his life and his goods in the lawless spaces between kingdoms. The Mongols did not invent the Silk Road, but they opened it in a way it had never been opened before. And for roughly a century, during what historians sometimes call the Pax Mongolica, the flow of goods and knowledge and people across the interior of Asia reached a volume that would not be matched again until the age of European maritime expansion. You are walking along this road now, slowly, feeling the dust under whatever remains of your inadequate shoes. The landscape around you shifts as you move. The steppe gives way to scrubland, the scrubland to irrigated fields, the fields to the outskirts of a city.
Perhaps it is Samarkand. Perhaps it is Bukhara, or Tabriz, or Kashgar, or any one of the dozens of trading cities that the Mongols conquered, often with devastating violence, and then, in many cases, rebuilt and administered with surprising efficiency. The Mongols were not city builders by instinct. They were people of the open grassland, and the density and smell and confinement of urban life was alien to them, in much the same way their steppe was alien to you. But they understood the value of cities. They understood that wealth flowed through them, that taxes could be extracted from them, that skilled artisans and engineers and administrators lived in them. And so the Mongols, who could destroy a city faster than any force on earth, also learned to govern cities, often by employing the very people they had conquered to run them.
You pass through a gate. The city is busy. Camels are being unloaded in a caravanserai, their packs heavy with silk and spices and lacquerware from China. Merchants are haggling in a language you do not understand, perhaps Persian, perhaps Turkic, perhaps a pidgin blend of several tongues that has emerged specifically to serve the needs of long-distance trade. There are Muslims here, and Christians, and Buddhists, and Taoists, and practitioners of the old Tengriist sky worship that the Mongols themselves brought with them from the steppe. The Mongols, for much of their imperial period, practiced a remarkable religious tolerance, not out of philosophical conviction necessarily, but out of pragmatism. They did not care what god you prayed to, so long as you paid your taxes and obeyed the law. Genghis Khan himself sought audiences with holy men of every tradition, curious perhaps about which of them might hold some special power or insight. His successors continued this practice. In Karakoram, according to the Franciscan friar William of Rubruck, who visited in the 1250s, there were mosques and churches and Buddhist temples standing within sight of one another, and the Khan would attend ceremonies at all of them, hedging his spiritual bets with the same strategic calculation he applied to everything else. You linger in the caravanserai for a while. The smells are rich and layered. There is the sharp sweetness of cinnamon, the earthy warmth of cumin, the faint tang of something fermented. Animals shift and breathe in their pens. A man is mending a saddle. A woman is pouring tea from a brass pot, and the steam rises in a thin curl that catches the light from a high window. You do not belong here. You cannot speak the languages. You do not know the customs of trade, the weights and measures, the etiquette of negotiation. But you can watch. And what you see is a world in motion, a world knitted together by the roads and the laws and the sheer imperial will of people who, 2 generations earlier, were scattered clans of herders fighting over grazing land. Consider for a moment what moved along these roads. Silk, obviously, porcelain, gold, silver, horses, furs, gems, slaves too, because this was an empire, and empires are built
on the labor of the unfree, but also knowledge, paper money, which the Mongols adopted from the Chinese and attempted to implement across their domains, sometimes successfully and sometimes disastrously. Printing technology, gunpowder, medical texts, astronomical observations. The Mongols gathered scholars and craftsmen from every conquered territory and redistributed them where they were needed. Chinese siege engineers appeared at the walls of Persian cities. Persian administrators managed Chinese provinces. An Nestorian Christian from Central Asia might find himself serving as a diplomat in the court of the Great Khan, translating between languages and worldviews that had never before been forced into conversation with one another. And disease. You cannot talk about the roads of the Mongol Empire without talking about disease. The same networks that carried silk and ideas also carried the bacterium Yersinia pestis, the agent of bubonic plague, which travelled along the trade routes from Central Asia to the ports of the Black Sea, and from there, in the fleas of rats aboard Genoese trading ships, to the cities of Europe, where it became the Black Death and killed perhaps a third of the population of the continent. The Mongol Empire did not cause the plague, but it created the conditions for its spread, connecting ecosystems that had been separate for millennia and allowing pathogens to travel at the speed of commerce. This is one of the dark ironies of connectivity. The same openness that allowed a merchant to carry cinnamon from Ceylon to Crimea also allowed a bacterium to travel from a marmot burrow on the Mongolian steppe to the lungs of a child in Florence. You step out of the caravanserai and back onto the road, and you keep walking, westward now, toward the edge of the empire and the edge of this story. The landscape changes again. The irrigated fields thin out. The terrain becomes drier, rockier. You are approaching the lands where the Mongol advance finally stopped. Not because the Mongols were defeated, but because the empire was too large, too fractured by succession disputes, too stretched across too many different geographies and cultures to hold together as a single entity. The great Khans after Chinggis, Ogadai, Guyuk, Monka, Kublai, each tried in their own way to maintain the unity of the empire, and each found it slipping further from their grasp. By the late 13th century, the four Khanates were effectively independent, cooperating sometimes, warring with one another at other times, slowly absorbing the cultures of the peoples they ruled, until the Mongol rulers of Persia became Persian, and the Mongol rulers of China became Chinese, and the Mongol rulers of the Russian steppe became something new entirely, a Turkic-Mongol hybrid culture that would shape the politics of Eastern Europe and Central Asia for centuries. But that dissolution is still in the future. For now, in the moment you are inhabiting, the empire still holds. The roads are still open. The yam, the postal relay system that Chinggis Khan established, still functions. Its stations spaced roughly every 25 to 30 miles across the length and breadth of the empire, each one stocked with fresh horses and provisions, and staffed by riders who can carry a message from one end of the known world to the other in a matter of weeks. Marco Polo, who travelled through the empire in the 1270s, described the yam with undisguised wonder, noting that a message could travel 200 or even 250 miles in a single day through the relay system, a speed of communication that Europe would not match for centuries. The yam was not merely a postal service. It was the nervous system of the empire, the thing that allowed a Khan sitting in Karakoram or later in Khanbalik, modern Beijing, to know what was happening in his domains thousands of miles away and to respond to it within a time frame that made governance possible across such impossible distances. You stop walking. You have come far enough. The road stretches on ahead of you, but you are tired, and you were tired long before this walk began. You were tired from the cold and the wind and the failed attempts to do the simplest things that a Mongol child could do without thinking. You sit down by the side of the road. The dust settles around you. The sun is lower now, not setting yet, but angling toward the horizon in that long, slow decline that gives the steppe its golden afternoons. You sit and you think about what you have seen. You think about the people who built this. Not the Khans, not the generals, not the figures whose names survived in the chronicles, but the ordinary people, the herders, the women who raised the jers and milked the mares and kept the fires burning through the winter, the children who learned to ride before they learned to walk, the soldiers who marched for months across deserts and mountains on a diet of dried meat and fermented milk, who slept in the saddle, who fought with a discipline and coordination that made the finest armies of the settled world look clumsy by comparison. These were not superhuman beings. They were people, shaped by their environment, trained by the demands of a life that was, by any modern standard, unimaginably hard. They did not have the luxury of specialization. Every herder was also a soldier. Every woman was also an engineer of domestic survival. Every child was in training from the moment they could sit upright, because the steppe did not forgive incompetence, and the empire did not tolerate weakness. The settled world called them barbarians. The chroniclers of the cities they destroyed wrote about them with horror and contempt, describing them as savage, as less than human, as a divine punishment sent to scourge the civilized world for its sins. And it is true that the Mongol conquests were attended by violence on a scale that is difficult to comprehend. Cities were razed. Populations were massacred. Irrigation systems that had sustained agriculture for centuries were deliberately destroyed, turning fertile land into desert. The Mongols used terror as a weapon, and they used it effectively, spreading stories of their own brutality ahead of their armies, so that cities would surrender without a fight, rather than face the consequences of resistance. The suffering was real, and it should not be minimized or romanticized. But the people who caused that suffering were also the people who built the roads and opened the trade routes and maintained the postal system and practiced religious tolerance and gathered the knowledge of a dozen civilizations into a single imperial framework. They were not one thing. They were, like all people, many things at once, capable of extraordinary cruelty and extraordinary achievement, sometimes in the same generation, sometimes in the same individual. Genghis Khan, who ordered the deaths of millions, also established a legal code that brought order to a world of feuding clans. Kublai Khan, who completed the conquest of China, also patronized the arts and sciences and built one of the most cosmopolitan courts the world had ever seen. The Mongol Empire was not a simple story of destruction. It was a complicated, contradictory, deeply human story of what happens when a small group of people from one of the harshest environments on Earth suddenly find themselves in possession of the largest contiguous land empire in history, and must figure out, on the fly, how to run it. Now let yourself return. The road fades, the city fades, the caravanserai and the camels and the merchants fade, the successor khanates and the postal stations and the Silk Road fade. You are back on the steppe. You are back where you started, in that same wide open space, with the grass around your knees and the wind pressing against your face, and the sky above you so large and so empty that it feels less like a sky and more like a statement about the nature of existence. The sun is going down now. The gold has deepened to amber, and the amber is beginning to shade toward a colour that has no proper name, something between copper and rust, and the last light of a fire that has burned all day and is finally settling into its embers. You are alone here. You are always alone here. You arrived with nothing useful, no skills, no knowledge, no language, no understanding of the animals, or the land, or the law, or the social order. You could not build a shelter. You could not find food. You could not ride. You could not fight. You could not even walk into a ger without committing an offence that might cost you your life. You would not have lasted a day. And that is not a judgment. It is simply a fact, a measure of the distance between your world and theirs, between the things your life has taught you and the things their lives demanded of them. But consider this as the light fades. Consider that the distance is not a failing, it is simply a distance. The Mongol herder set down in your world would be just as lost. The skills that kept them alive on the steppe, the deep knowledge of animals and weather and grass and movement, the ability to read the sky and the ground and the behaviour of a horse at 100 yards, none of it would help them navigate a grocery store, or a highway, or a job interview, or any of the countless small systems that you move through every day without thinking. Survival is always local. It is always specific. It is always a matter of knowing the particular set of things that your particular world requires. And no one knows the things that someone else's world requires, not without years of patient learning.
So do not feel ashamed of your failure here. Feel instead a kind of quiet awe at what these people were, at what they built, at the sheer improbability of their achievement. They came from nothing, from scattered clans on a windswept grassland at the edge of the known world. And in the span of a single lifetime, they conquered more of the earth's surface than the Romans managed in centuries. They connected civilizations that had never spoken to one another. They moved goods and ideas and technologies across distances that should have been impossible. They changed the course of history in ways that are still being felt today, in the borders of nations, in the distribution of languages, in the genetic heritage of populations across Eurasia. And then they faded, as all empires do, not with a single dramatic collapse, but with a slow loosening, a gradual absorption into the cultures they had conquered, until the Mongol identity itself became something diffuse, something woven into the fabric of a dozen different peoples and places. The steppe remained. The wind remained. The grass grew back over the tracks of the horses, and the sky went on being enormous and indifferent and beautiful in the way that only truly empty places can be. You are still sitting here. The last of the light is going. The first stars are appearing, faint at first, then brighter, then suddenly overwhelming in their number and their clarity, because there is no light pollution here, no glow from any city, no haze from any highway. The sky fills with stars the way a bowl fills with water, steadily and completely, until you cannot look anywhere without seeing them. This is the sky that the Mongols knew. This is the sky they navigated by, prayed under, slept beneath on 1,000 campaigns across 1,000 miles of open ground. It is the same sky that hangs above you now, wherever you are, though you may not have looked at it in a long time. The wind is still blowing. It has been blowing since the beginning, since the first chapter, since you arrived here with nothing and understood nothing and failed at everything. It will go on blowing after you leave. The steppe does not care about your visit. It does not care about the empire that rose from it and fell back into it and left only the faintest traces on the land itself. It cares only about the wind and the grass and the turning of the seasons, and it will go on caring about those things long after every empire that ever was has been forgotten. You stand up, slowly. Your legs are stiff. The cold has settled deeper than you thought. You take one last look around you at the dark grass and the dark sky and the stars and the wind, and you feel something that is not quite sadness and not quite admiration and not quite loneliness, but something that contains all three, a quiet recognition that you have been standing in a place where extraordinary things happened, done by extraordinary people, and that you could not have been one of them, and that this is all right, and that knowing it is enough. You turn and you walk away, back toward whatever warmth and shelter and familiar world is waiting for you. The step stays behind. The wind closes over the place where you are standing, and the grass straightens. And within moments, there is no sign that you were ever here at all.